Max has a brand new pack of cards. Let's see what's inside.
All right, now that we're done with all that premium pack nonsense, we can get back to good old regular packs. What we'll be reviewing today is the long-awaited In Daznak's Pit. I'm just kidding. Calm over Westeros because why not? George R. R. Martin can get away with saying that he's going to write a book and then never doing it and keeping the fans waiting. So why can't I continuously say that I'm going to review In Daznak's Pit and then do other things? Yeah, I'm not salty. I'm not mad. The amount of plastic that I have contributed to landfills by cutting through all of these packs, I don't even want to think about it. As usual, we'll be starting with the Starks. Great John's Vanguard. He's a 5-cost, non-loyal, non-unique Stark character with a military and power icon. His traits are Army and House Umber. No attachments. While there are fewer than 3 plots in your used pile, Great John's Vanguard gets +2 strength and gains renown. They actually used fewer correctly instead of less for once. I'm shocked. The House Umber trait stands out for me. I've never seen that before. Again, I haven't looked through the Starks a lot. There are a lot of Umber characters in the books. I could definitely see it being similar to the Baratheon House Florent support, where like Alistair Florent supports Florent cards. There might be some cards that support House Umber, I don't know. You can stand it with that location, I forget what it's called, High Ground or something. You can use the plot card Muster the Realm to give it extra claim when you're attacking with it. Most armies have the no attachments card. I guess it's because you couldn't equip like one sword to an entire army. I guess that's worth noting that you can't buff this guy. I don't know of any Stark attachments that you might want to put on him because, like I said, I'm least familiar with this deck, but he can't be Milk of the Poppied, so it's good and bad. 5 is probably the most awkward cost something can have, but this isn't unique anyway, so it's not like Great Hall would help it if it were 6. To see an effect that references plots in your used pile, that's more of like a Dornish thing. They like to wait. They like to have a slow game at the beginning, but then as their plots stack up, they get stronger and stronger. This guy's the opposite. He does not like having a lot of plots in your used pile. Basically, if you play this guy early game, he will have temporarily, because the plot cards will stack up, 6 strength, 2 icons, and renown. Barring House Umber support that makes this really useful, I don't see it as being that helpful, but maybe it'll go along with some Stark army deck that uses Robb Stark's host that I don't know about. The next Stark card is called Winterfell Crypt. It's a 1-cost, loyal Stark location with the Winterfell trait. Reaction. After a unique Stark character you control is killed or sacrificed during the challenges phase, sacrifice Winterfell Crypt to choose a character with equal or lower printed strength. At the end of the phase, if that character is still in play, shuffle it back into its owner's deck. I like this. I've noticed a lot of Starks have effects that sacrifice themselves in order to trigger. Pretty sure this has to do with, their playstyle being based around how they are in the show, where they're always dying or dying for the greater good because they're so noble and so great. Because a lot of Starks do that, it's not absurd that this would trigger, not to mention it just works off of military claim. Anything that can kill or sacrifice your guys, even that you could trigger during the challenges phase, you could synergize this with Harrenhal, Ag the Mighty. I don't know if you're using Baratheons, you could use Glamour or something. Just seems like an effect that you'll get off a lot. I also am just a total sucker for locations that sacrifice themselves. As I've said, I love to use the 4-cost version of King's Landing. Having a lot of locations that sacrifice themselves really just combo well with that because it can also marshal locations from the discard pile. Typically when I run King's Landing, I'm using King's Road instead of like Rose Road or other things to make marshaling cheaper instead of getting gold because I can bring it back every turn. This is an in-faction sacrificial location, so King's Landing could bring it back and you could use it every turn. Its effect is cool. I mean, some of the cards that you don't want to lose, like the biggest cost cards that you're not going to purposefully get rid of, are the ones that are going to have the highest printed strength and give you the best bang for your buck here. Because it is printed strength. You can't use attachments or anything. There's no shenanigans around that. Printed strength is printed strength. I suppose one shenanigan I could think about, and this wouldn't work with this card exactly, but there is a Night's Watch card whose printed strength is X, where X is equal to your reserve value. So in that case, even though it's variable strength, that would be its printed strength. That obviously wouldn't trigger with this card because it's not a Stark and it's not unique, but I am wondering if there are any unique Stark cards that have variable strength like that, because if that's the case, this could be pretty helpful. You can get something that's is weaker than what you had, but just because it's weaker in terms of strength does not mean that it is weaker in terms of abilities. I'm sure there are some high cost ones that have lower strength than some of the low cost ones. So yeah, you could actually go plus on some gold. The only problem is at the end of the challenges phase, it goes back to the deck. So you're not actually keeping it permanently. Seems to synergize well with the Starks. Again, I can't think of any particular combos because I don't know the Starks that well, but it seems to fit their theme. So, Rose Road Patrol is a 4-cost Tyrell, non-unique, non-loyal character with a military and power icon and 3 strength. It has the trait Army, no attachments, as all Army people do, and its ability is, while you control a character with the highest strength in play, Rose Road Patrol gains stealth. I definitely see what they're doing with this. It's not necessarily just about playing a character that has the highest strength. Tyrells have a lot of attachments and specifically events that can raise the strength of their characters. If you use an event like Growing Strong during the challenges phase that they didn't know you had, then all of a sudden this guy could get stealth in the middle of the turn and they wouldn't see that coming. So that's pretty cool. Also, as I said, he's an Army, so you can stand him again with that neutral location. I don't know how many Army cards Tyrell has or if it'd be worth running, but a character that gains stealth could be stood again with a neutral location and then could have extra claim because of Muster the Realm. I like it. It doesn't really do much to support your board. It's more of just like a challenges thing. It doesn't give you that much tempo, but stealth is always good. The fact that it can be surprise stealth is good, and it's non-unique, so you can have a couple copies of it. 4 is a little bit costly, but I would say if it were 3, it would be a little too good. So I think solid card, nothing game-changing, but it's pretty good. Moving right along to the Night's Watch, we have Chet. So he is a non-loyal, unique Night's Watch character. He costs 3, he only has an intrigue icon, and he has 3 strength. He has the Steward trait, and he has no attachments except a weapon. Pretty common amongst stewards. His ability is a dominance action. Kneel a steward character to return a direwolf or raven card from your discard pile to your hand, limit once per phase. Looking at the Night's Watch alone, there are some good raven and direwolf cards. Cage of Ravens, which only can equip to a steward. Old Bear's Raven, if you're running that, maybe you want to give something stealth, or maybe you just want to make your Old Bear a Trigon. There's also Ghost, the attachment, who is a direwolf. He's a 2-cost attachment that just goes on to a Night's Watch character. Problem with Ghost and problem with Cage of Ravens and things like that is that a lot of stewards and a lot of Night's Watch characters have this text that says no attachments except weapons. Ghost is not a weapon. Cage of Ravens is not a weapon, even though it can only be equipped to a steward, and you'd think that this guy would be the guy that would be supporting it. A lot of them have very restrictive limitations on what you can equip to them. The only Direwolf and Raven cards in the deck are attachments, with one exception. A 1-cost Night's Watch card that does have the Raven trait, and it's actually a character. You play it, and then during dominance, you can return to your hand to draw a card. It's if nothing else, military fodder. It'll draw things back for you at the end of the turn. And even though it's loyal, which I typically don't like because it messes with Hollow Hill, the fact that you return it to your hand during a dominance action means that you can return it to your hand before Hollow Hill would trigger, so it doesn't actually mess with Hollow Hill. Like, why are these cards going to end up in your discard pile? Like, none of these cards sacrifice themselves to do things. Even Ghost is not only not terminal, but he actually has an effect that specifically returns him to your hand. If you're playing a Night's Watch Stark build, on the other hand, there's a ton of Direwolf characters that this might be useful on. I haven't really looked at the Stark Direwolf pack, but this would definitely be able to fetch you a lot of stuff. Overall, I'm sure there's a deck that works with him, but a lot of Night's Watch cards are a lot more splashable. I mean, he has the Steward keyword, which works well for, you need that for fresh recruits. It has a whole reserve build built behind it. The Raven attachments that he's searching, at least Cage of Ravens, can only be equipped to stewards. And his effect requires him to kneel a steward character. So you could kneel himself, but if you have other stewards that you would rather kneel during dominance because they're weaker than him for some reason, you can always do that. I don't typically play that many attachments in my Night's Watch deck or go for this Raven build, but overall, yeah, he's the only real Raven support, and Raven is mostly like Steward support, at least Cage of Ravens, which, like I said, I think is the best one. So I see his place. I don't use him in any of my decks. I'm sure he has a role, but in a vacuum, he's not a very good card. The next Night's Watch card is a loyal location called Northern Rookery. It's 2 costs, and it has a +1 reserve modifier. Its only trait is the North, which I've seen before, but I don't think is supported. And its only effect is reaction. After you marshal Northern Rookery, draw 1 card. On the one hand, I like locations a lot. I like reserve a lot in my Night's Watch build, and just being able to play this and then draw a card to replace it, especially when you have high reserve, is not bad. Not to mention the fact that there's just not a lot of ways to actually up your reserve. So if you want a reserve build, you need to run like Northern Rookery, you need to run Eastwatch by the Sea, you need to run Samwell Tarly and Bowen Marsh, and all the cards that give you reserve, and then you can really buff up your, Protectors of the Realm. I don't want to say it's a good card, but I do run it because I need all the reserve I can get. It's just one time when you play it, it replaces itself. So basically, you paid 2 gold to just replace a card. You have this on the board now, and all you're getting out of it is a little bit of deck cycling and a +1 reserve. It's also really annoying that it has to be marshaled because it's a 2 cost or lower Night's Watch location. So aged craftsman could put this directly into play, but it would not count. Ultimately, I think this is one of the weaker Night's Watch locations, and there's a stiff competition for some good locations. All right, Baratheon. So the first one is a loyal location called Kingswood. It's not unique. I like not unique in-faction locations. Plus 1, its only trait is Westeros, which everything should have except for, I guess, some Tar cards. During power challenges in which you are the defending player, each attacking character gets -1 strength. But if you lose a power challenge, you have to sack this. Like I said, I like locations that sacrifice themselves because I typically like to run King's Landing builds, and then you could play it back if you need to again later. It does synergize with the Baratheon theme of winning power challenges. And this is for each character, right? So it's not just -1 is not very much, but for each character getting -1, or -2 or -3, depending on how many you have, it could make it very, very difficult for you to lose a power challenge, especially considering they are, like, Baratheons already are pretty good at that. All you need to do is lose 1 power challenge. All you need to do is lose 1 power challenge, and this sacrifices itself. Probably can win the power challenges if that's what your deck is built around, but then your opponent has this complete freedom to bait you into blocking with people just because you no longer can lose a power challenge or you will lose this card. Now, it wasn't much of an investment. It was 1 gold. I don't think this card is very good. I have a King's Landing Baratheon deck that I put this in originally specifically because it sacrifices itself and I knew I could play it again, but I just realized it was pointless. Either your opponent is just not going to do power challenges, and if they're the first player, that means you have to do more stuff to block with because they know they won't win, or your opponent is going to use this against you to bait out power challenges that you now have to win because otherwise this will sacrifice itself. That's not really a huge deal because the Baratheons don't like to lose power challenges anyway. There are other cards, I forget what it's called, but it's like you kneel it if you haven't lost a power challenge at the end of the challenges phase and you draw 2 cards. So you're probably going to be wanting to defend power challenges anyway, but 1 slip up and you lose this card, I don't think that's worth it for the negligible impact it has. Next Baratheon card is fun. It's a 0-cost attachment, non-loyal, non-unique, called Stinking Drunk. It's a condition, and it's opponent's character only. Reaction after they stand, sacrifice Stinking Drunk to kneel that character. 0 cost is good for anything, but 0 cost is particularly good for attachments and locations and characters because you can play them during setup, and then you get to draw back, and your deck gets as small as possible before the actual game begins. Unfortunately, because this can only attach to your opponent's character, it's not going to work. The kneel control build that Baratheons have like keeping things knelt, and they might not necessarily need this, but if they just want a 0 cost that'll make sure one of their big guys that they couldn't quite manage to kneel, maybe if they were using Stannis so their opponent could only stand 2 characters, and then they use this to make sure that at least that turn they can only stand 1, that's a good effect. I mean, there's a whole build around that, but kneeling characters and keeping them knelt is just a good effect. And this card is non-loyal and it's non-unique. So you can splash it into any deck where you're using a Baratheon agenda or faction card. As many copies as you want, you can have them equipped. This card is just kind of fun in general. I mean, yes, it sacrifices itself after 1 use, but it's 0 cost, so who really cares? Just keep things knelt. It'll only work once, but it costs you 0. Why not? I think it's a good card. Mr. Time. So we're going to start off with everybody's favorite character, Bronn. So he is a 1 cost with only a military icon. He's unique, he's non-loyal, and he has 5 strength. 5 strength for 1 cost. You gotta be kidding me. He has the mercenary trait, and his effect is during a challenge in which you are the defending player, he gains a military, intrigue, and a power icon. That's crazy. He's a Trigon with 5 strength for 1. What's the downside? Marshalling action. Pay 1 gold to take control of Bronn. Any player may initiate this ability. This is fun. First of all, I just love the redundancy of he already has a military icon, but if you're the defending player, he gains a military icon, like on the off chance that you're playing against Dorne and they use Starfall to take away his military icon. Like, no, he's a Trigon no matter what. Lannisters like gold. So there's kind of 2 ways that they go about having gold. They either have really good cards that are really cheap, like this card in the Hound, but then come with some kind of downside, or they just get gold for themselves. This is one of their ways that they can keep a big gold pool, like maybe if they want to buff their Tywin Lannister, who gets 1 strength for all the gold in their pool, and yet still have formidable bodies on the board. What's really fun about this is that the pay 1 gold to take control of Bronn, any player may initiate this ability, is not a once per turn, but it's only a marshalling action. Especially if you're the second player, you can see, if your opponent has no gold, first of all, then you know that this turn, your Bronn is safe. Imagine if you're the second player, then him becoming a Trigon while defending is just super helpful. And if they do have gold, it becomes this fun little game of like, okay, you pay 1 gold to take control of Bronn. I'll pay 1 gold to take him back. You pay 1 back. Which one of us is going to stop first? Are probably going to win that because they have a lot of gold. That's their thing. They get a lot of gold. And because you can only do this during marshalling, like I said, your opponent can't sneak up on you during the challenges phase. Once you know that you have him for the rest of the turn. Or if your opponent gets him, you know what you're dealing with. You can also do the same thing to Bronn that you can do with the Hound, and there are other cards that are cheap but good with negative side effects. And you can equip him with Milk of the Poppy if you just don't want him to have this ability. Unlike the Hound, though, who only has a negative ability, you would also be giving up his ability to become a Trigon. So it would basically be a 1 cost military with 5 strength, and then another 1 cost for the Milk of the Poppy, which is pretty good, but it's more up in the air on if you would want to do it or not, especially if you want to bait your opponent into using some gold to take control of him, and then use some secret cards you have to get extra gold to get him back. This card is just really fun and really cool. In terms of his traits, there's not much to mention. Aegon Targaryen in the Targaryen faction has support for mercenaries, and so does like Daario Naharis and I think a bunch of other cards. But the Targs are really the only ones that support mercenaries. There's actually anti-support. It's called bribery or something, but there's some neutral event where you can pay gold equal to a character's printed cost to take control of it if it's a mercenary. With Bronn, that's a little redundant because his printed cost is 1 and you can pay 1 gold to take control of him anyway. So actually the anti-support doesn't really matter. Great card. Next Lannister card is a loyal 2-cost event called Trial by Combat. When claim is applied for an intrigue challenge, apply military claim instead. The Lannisters have a lot of intrigue ability. They can get intrigue off really easily, and a lot of their strategy revolves around getting rid of your opponent's hand. So this is sort of a way for you to not really focus on a military build, but then when you need to get clear off their board, you can do it. In terms of rulings, if you have a card which the Lannisters do have, that increases the claim value on your intrigue challenges, that will still apply to this. Even though you're applying military claim, the claim value of your intrigue challenge is still unaffected, so you could kill two things with this. Increasing intrigue claim is usually pretty easy to do, especially for Lannisters, because intrigue isn't as devastating as military, but this is a way for you to turn that increased claim into combat. It's a 2-cost event. I don't like events. I don't like 2-cost events. There's plenty of ways you could build your deck around having people like Bronn or like the Hound who have military icons. If you're building an intrigue build, it's probably because you want to focus on intrigue challenges. You want to clear their hand. You want to get rewards from that. But you still do consider yourself to have won an intrigue challenge. So any bonus you might get from when you win an intrigue challenge still applies. It's just that the claim is different. Your opponent's not discarding cards in their hand. So I do see the point of this. One little shenanigan worth mentioning is that it doesn't specify you have to use it on yourself. It'd be really cool to use this on your opponent and then just kill something like Lysa Arryn when they thought they were just discarding cards from your hand, and then remove something from the game. That's really wonky and would probably never happen and is not the intended usage, but I really like that this card leaves that possibility open. Moving on to Ironborn, we start off with something pretty simple. So it is a non-unique, non-loyal card called Raider from Pike. It is a 2-cost character with a military icon, 2 strength. It appropriately has the Raider trait, and its effect is each weapon card in your hand gains ambush equal to its printed cost. These 2 costs, there is Raider support. He has fine strength, even though he only has 1 icon. He's splashable. The fact that he's non-unique doesn't really matter because having multiple copies of him on the field doesn't benefit you in any way. The effect only is needed once. On a weapon-based deck, you can do it. I can only think of like Driftwood Cudgel and Corsair's Dirk off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are other Ironborn weapons. It's nice to have ambush on weapons. That's cool. And I can definitely see a bunch of wacky wombo combos of if you play an Ironborn deck and something else, because this guy isn't even loyal, a more weapon-focused deck, then you'd be able to splash out a bunch of attachments in the middle of the turn that would be helpful. It does suck that they're limited to weapon attachments, because some of the most coolest ones are non-weapons, but it's something. It's a unique effect. I don't really have much to say on him because in faction, I haven't found a use for him, but mixing factions, I think there's definitely a lot of potential behind him. The next Ironborn card is a really good one. It's a non-unique, non-loyal, 1-cost location called Iron Mines. Only trade is Iron Islands. And interrupt. When a character would be killed, sacrifice Iron Mines to save that character. I love locations that sacrifice themselves because King's Landing can get them back, and this is probably the cream of the crop when it comes to in-faction ones. That means every turn you can bring this back if you have King's Landing, and then unless your opponent has an extra military challenge, targeted removal, or high claim, their military challenges are basically pointless, and they have no real way of reducing your field. This is non-loyal. It's really splashable in any deck that is using the Ironborn, even if it has nothing to do with the strategy, just because being able to save your characters is good, and if you're using King's Landing, you should definitely be using this. In faction, there's a good amount of support for characters being saved. Like, there's another Maester who can also kill himself to save characters, and then there's a version of Aeron Damphair that rewards you when characters are saved, so if you use this, that Maester, I think it's Maester like Kerwin or something. You could also use Risen from the Sea. You could use Victorion Greyjoy's ability. There's always Bodyguard. That's kind of weird because I feel like there's not nearly as much support for saving people in the Ironborn faction, especially the Drowned Gods, as there is for letting them die and then bringing them back and rewarding yourself for that. In that sense, this card doesn't really synergize as well, but it could still act really well as a failsafe. If you have a deck that focuses on killing your characters or doesn't worry about military claim because you want them to die, because you want to use Aeron Damphair and Drowned God's Acolyte and Drowned God's Apostle, but then you accidentally take it too far and then you need to kill more characters in a turn than you're willing to, having this one cost, non-unique location out, having a bunch of copies of them that you can trigger whenever you want, that's just phenomenal. It's just really, really good. It's a good failsafe. It's just good in a vacuum in any deck, and it's very splashable. It's cyclable with King's Landing, and if you really want to, there is direct support for it by supporting things that get saved. I think this is the best card we've seen in the pack so far. I love this card. It can counter Valor Morghulis. It can counter anything that doesn't specifically have the text cannot be saved. On to the Targ. So we start with Miri Maz-Dur, who does not have the most flattering artwork. She is a non-loyal but unique 7-cost Targaryen card with an intrigue and power icon and 5 strength. She's Lazarine and she's a Magi. So I have never seen either of those traits before, and I doubt they have any support. The Ghost of Highheart isn't even a Magi. And isn't she Maggie the Frog? I don't know, because the epithets are confusing me. When claim is applied for a challenge in which Miri Maz-Dur is attacking alone, choose a character controlled by the losing opponent instead of the normal claim effects, kill that character. So she doesn't have a military icon, but she can certainly do some damage. To be attacking alone, and she has to win, and she only has 5 strength, and she doesn't have stealth. The Targaryens have a lot of ways of lowering your opponent's strength, and so if you can do that, and every turn you can do a challenge with her that kills off one of their guys, targeted removal is amazing. It doesn't say cannot be saved, but nonetheless, that is still good. She is 7 cost, she is hugely expensive, and this effect is good, but is it 7 cost good? It's situational, the fact that you have to attack alone with her. They might have to use a lot of resources in order to block, so that could be good, I guess, just baiting them into doing that. But I don't think her effect will trigger enough to merit her being 7 cost. It also prevents all effects from triggering that are like when you would apply military claim or when you would apply intrigue claim or when you would apply power claim or anything like that, which there's not that many of, but you're not applying any actual pre-existing type of claim. If you are playing cards that have higher than 1 claim, this doesn't. Like, you just kill 1 character. Even if you're playing that one plot card that I forget the name of, like Desperate Attack or something, that has 3 claim, it doesn't matter. Like, a military guy might have been able to kill off 3 people, even though you don't get to pick, but she gets to pick and kill 1. So the targeting removal aspect is nice, but it is worth noting that she does not get any advantages from having a higher claim, which is one of the biggest advantages that you can give yourself in this game. Is she worth 7? No. I think if she were 6 or honestly even 5 with maybe 1 lower strength, she'd be worth it. But right now, I just can't find a reason to add her. She doesn't particularly synergize with much, and she has stupid traits. Next up, we have a loyal Targaryen 1-cost event called Blood Magic Ritual. You get this really sad picture of Khal Drogo as just a zombie. He appears to be bathing in blood, and his wound is very infected. I like the artwork. When a non-army character would be killed, save it. Then attach Blood Magic Ritual to that character as a condition attachment with the text terminal. Treat attached character's printed text box as if it were blank, except for traits. You can save any character you have that's not an army, but then you negate its ability. This is just a worse version of the Greyjoy card Risen from the Sea, because that's a 0 cost that saves something, and then instead of having a negative effect, it gives it +3 strength. And it doesn't have any stipulations on if it has to be an army character or not. What is the big deal about army? I feel like there's a huge gap in my knowledge of these cards that they feel the need to specify non-army on so many things. I don't know if it's a lore thing, like it wouldn't be possible to conduct a blood magic ritual on an entire army, or if it's actually a balancing mechanic, but it's just strange. Some Targaryen cards you actually want to negate, like maybe the original version of Jorah Mormont that sacrifices himself after he wins 3 challenges. But you could not use this in response to his original sacrifice because it's only when they would be killed. Probably going to be from military claim. Maybe they have some kind of targeted removal. If they kill your character, not discard, in a way that doesn't say cannot be saved, then you can pay 1 gold, bring it back, and negate its effects. That's usually not worth it. This card just doesn't synergize with anything in particular that I can think of. I actually think this is a pretty bad card because Miriam's Door, she didn't synergize particularly, but targeted removal is always good. Saving someone is usually good, but not under all these specific circumstances. So though neither of them may particularly synergize with Targaryens, I think Blood Magic Ritual is much worse, and I didn't have the highest opinion of Miriam Azdur. My favorite faction, Dorne. So we start off with Knights of the Sun. It's a 4-cost, non-unique, non-loyal Dornish card with a military icon, a power icon, 4 strength, the traits Army and Knight, 2 good traits, no attachments except weapon, of course, because it's an army, although I guess this army can have at least weapons. And while there are 3 or more plot cards in your used pile, Knights of the Sun gains renown. An army, and I've gone over all the army support that it could get, so there's that. It's in well with the Dornish theme. It's pretty easy to quickly get 3 or more plot cards in your used pile. Honestly, first turn, you could play Prince Doran's Behest and then play Bricasso, put 2 gold on him, and then the requirements for this would already be met. Him getting renown is almost sort of a given. It's going to happen. He's a 4-cost, non-unique army knight with 2 icons, 4 strength, and renown. That's fine. I don't think renown is that good, to be honest. If you have a lot of characters with renown, then you can get a lot more power per turn and get to the win condition quickly. Having 1 character with renown, they're not going to be getting that much power every turn. And then having power in such a precarious place where it can be killed is not that helpful in getting towards your win condition. This isn't like a Baratheon deck where when they get power, things happen, like Bobby B or Lightbringer. There's that other guy, Sir... There's a knight that does the same thing. It's just strictly renown in a vacuum. It's just, do you want extra power? Sure, take it. I wouldn't use this in one of my Dorne decks, but it does fit with the theme of the plot card, so it's going to have that renown. 4 cost for 2 icons, 4 strength, and renown is pretty good. Army support, you can stand him again, which means double renown. Yeah, I haven't made a Dornish knight deck yet, but knights have a lot of support. I've been seeing a lot of them. Cletus Ironwood is a great card. I could definitely see him fitting in to a type of Dornish build that I haven't made. So I'm going to mark this card as potential, but of the Dorne cards that I've seen, I don't think he's amazing. We have the Dornish event Vengence for Elia. This is a loyal Dornish 2-cost event. It just has the most badass picture of just this guy holding up a spear in front of the sun, representing Sun Spear, and this is clearly the Red Viper, and I just love the Dornish art. When claim is applied for a challenge in which you are the defending player, choose an opponent, that player must satisfy the normal claim effect instead of you as if he or she were the defending player. They get the grammar so right. Like, they say he or she instead of they here because it's referring to an individual, but then sometimes they can't get less or fewer correct. I feel like with card games, you need to have the text down because grammatical ambiguities lead to ruling ambiguities. So, like, good on them for doing this correctly. How many events do you want to run in your Dornish deck? Do you want to run a 2-cost event? 2-cost events are expensive. I have a Dark Wings, Dark Words deck, and I use this, and I think this is a pretty good card. If you're not focusing on events, maybe not. It does synergize. I mean, Dorne likes to lose challenges. They're not only willing to lose challenges, they like to do it. There are a lot of cards that are like, if you've lost a challenge this phase, or when you lose a challenge this phase. The usefulness of this card is you can trigger those types of abilities by losing a challenge, and then instead of actually taking the downside of losing the challenge, you just make your opponent take it. And if they're really not expecting it, just a surprise military challenge when they're on the offense could be huge, especially because you will probably be the second player, because Dorne loves to be the second player. So they attack you, then they lose one of their guys. You're going to kill off someone who's knelt because you're about to attack and they need all their blockers. But maybe they won't if the challenge they just did was with their, like, big, bulky guy, and they know you're not as concerned with winning challenges as you are with losing challenges, so they didn't think that they needed him to block, and now all of a sudden, oh, okay, I have to kill something that can block. So this is a good card. It really is only good with military claim, in my opinion, but that's just me. The ruling on this is a little bit ambiguous, though. That player must satisfy the normal claim effect instead of you as if he or she were the defending player. Normally, I would think this means they're still the ones to have considered to have applied claim for the challenge, right? So effects that are like, when you apply claim for an intrigue challenge, even if you're applying it to yourself because of this card, they would still work. However, the text, as if he or she were the defending player, makes me think that it's almost like you applied the claim. I don't know why they would put that part in. I just think that's strange. I don't know what the ruling would be on that. The types of cards that trigger when you apply claim are kind of rare, but still, that confuses me a little bit. I mean, at the very least, it's redundant. You could just say that player must satisfy the normal claim effect instead of you. That if he or she is the defending player part is what makes me think maybe there's some ruling gambits. But yeah, no, ultimately this is a good card. It fits the Dornish theme. It's really just a matter of if you want to run a 2-cost event and save your gold, that's up to you. Neutral card time. The first one is called Street of Steel. It's a unique 1-cost location. It has the King's Landing trait. Reaction: when you win a military challenge, you can kneel your faction card to search the top 10 cards of your deck for a weapon or item attachment, reveal it, and add it to your hand. This would work well with Raiders from Pike. I like that it can search weapons and items. Items are pretty common. It can't search like conditions or titles or whatever, but that's okay. Items, I would say, are probably the most common attachment type. Maybe also weapons, but weapons are usually just like +2 strength. It doesn't seem worth it to me. Items are the ones that I use the most. This is just part of a series of cards like Shadow Black Lane and Streets of Silk and stuff, where it's after you win a certain type of challenge, you can search the top 10 cards of your deck for a certain type of card, but you have to kneel your faction card to do it. Not every deck wants to have a location out that requires them to kneel their faction card every turn. Even just one-off events like Loan from the Iron Bank, they want to be able to use. Duran Martell. There's a million cards that kneel faction cards, and if you want to get the most bang for your buck out of this, you're going to want to be using it every turn so you can search through your whole deck. That being said, you don't have to. You don't have to kneel your faction card. This is really good for a deck that's reliant on attachments. I've never made an attachment-based deck, but especially given the agendas that support attachments, trading with Cahor and Valyrian Steel certainly is a staple card in some decks. It is good. I don't particularly use it. I don't think there's anything particularly fancy to say about it in terms of combos. It's just a very good card. Now we have kind of a strange card. So this is a 4-cost unique location called the Eyrie. It has the famous House Aaron trait along with the lesser-known Stronghold trait. After a phase begins, you kneel the Eyrie, you pick a character, and then until the end of the phase, that character can't be killed. This card has a lot of layers to it, but just to start off, I have the same question that I've always had of, if I pick a character of mine that can't be killed, am I still allowed to choose it for military claim? Or if it can't be killed, am I not allowed to do that? Like, am I only allowed to pick valid targets? If I could do that, this card is a lot better than I currently think it is, but nonetheless, it still has its uses. First of all, it's 4 cost. 4 cost is ridiculously expensive for a location. Most locations are 3 or lower and can be searched by support of the people. Being 4 cost doesn't just mean that it costs more, it also means that it loses a lot of searchability. You can't even use House of the Red Door to start with this card. So like, its effect has to be pretty damn good, and it's not bad, but it's a little weird. Like, you can't use this as a response, like Iron Mines. You have to, at the beginning of the phase where you know your opponent is going to try something, kneel it first, and then pick the character that you know that they're going to try and kill. You have to know what your opponent has planned, know when they plan to do it. It has to be something that they can only do during one phase. It can't just be an action. It has to be like a challenges action or something. And you have to call it out at the beginning and kneel the Eyrie. You can use this on your opponent's cards, and I've been trying to think of ways to do it. Like, this is obviously meant to be used on your characters, but I thought it would be cool to come up with ways to use it on your opponent's characters. It just doesn't usually work. Like, Sky Cell is an attachment that you attach to your opponent's card, and then whenever they would draw cards, they kneel that character and then draw 1 fewer cards, but they have that character gains an action where they can kill it whenever they want. I was like, well, what if I use the Eyrie and I stop them from killing their own guy? That does not work because it's not just one phase. They can do it whenever they want. So if you tell them at the beginning, kneel the Eyrie, you can't kill this, they'll just wait until the marshalling phase, the Eyrie is already knelt, and then they will kill it. So any card that has an action that can kill something, this is kind of useless against. One good thing about this card, though, in comparison to things like Iron Mines and stuff, is that it doesn't save the characters. So things that say cannot be saved don't matter because they never got killed in the first place. This really skirts around a lot of removal that does have cannot be saved. And in that sense, it's very unique and it is very helpful, despite the fact that it's niche. Combo I could think of with it is you're running Mag the Mighty, whose effect is when you win a challenge, you kill one of your guys, and then your opponent kills one of their guys. You could use the Eyrie on your guy at the beginning, and then have Mag the Mighty's ability. That only works because Mag the Mighty says, and then, and not to. If Mag the Mighty said, kill one of your guys to kill one of your opponent's guys, then this would just be a dud because you wouldn't be able to kill it, so its effect wouldn't trigger. And that is the case with a lot of cards that require you to kill your own guys. It says to do this, so you can't save them and you can't stop them from being killed. Mag the Mighty doesn't work like that, so this would help. Mag the Mighty already costs 7 and this costs 4, and you'd need something else on the field. So if you really want to pay 11 gold for that niche combo, I would do it. I just feel like I'm missing something with this card. It might be the state of the meta that I play where it doesn't really revolve on a lot of targeted removal. It's not super aggressive. But 4 costs for a location, it just jumps out at me like this card better be huge for me to want to run this. And it seems so situational just because of the phase restriction. You have to do it at the beginning of the phase. You have to say that. Your opponent might have events that you don't know about, challenges events or marshalling events. You just can't always know. I don't think this card is worth 4 at all, but it might be if you could still choose that character from military claim. So I would really like to resolve that ruling gap that I have right now. Last neutral card is an event called Nightmares. It has the Dream trait. Action. Choose a character location. Until the end of the phase, treat that card's printed text box as if it were blank. And it has this until the end of the phase problem. I wanted to use this same combo that I wanted to with the Eyrie for Skycell, where I negate their text that lets them kill themselves, so they have to keep that card. But this is just until the end of the phase, and that's an action, so they can do it whenever. This is a little less committal. It's a 1 cost, and you can play it at any time. If your opponent is about to trigger something, you could use this to just treat it until it was blank until the end of the phase, and that's not as big of a deal because you don't need to predict as many things as with the Eyrie. You can do this on locations, you can do this on characters, you can just splash it out in the middle of the challenges phase when they don't expect it, when they've set up their board and they think they know what's going on, and then all of a sudden, boom, you pop this bad boy. It really depends on what your opponent's meta is. I mean, treating cards text boxes as if they were blank is good, and it only costs 1. And you can use it whenever, and you can use it in any deck. So it is good in a vacuum, but it's just sometimes you're just not going to need it. There are other ways also of removing their traits, like Milk of the Poppy, which is permanent. It's always worth noting you can use this on your own characters. So if your own characters, like for example the Hound or the Brawn that we looked at earlier, have negative abilities, downsides that only work during 1 phase, you can use this on them, and that's fun, and that's cool, and your opponent will be like, poof. So that's worth noting. At the end of the day, if you're playing Dark Wings, Dark Word, splash this in, it'll have usages. If you're playing a deck that really rewards you for playing events, then this is not a bad one. It's neutral. It doesn't subscribe to any particular strategy, but there's a lot of situations where it's useful. It only costs 1, and it just has an effect that can really get you out of a bind. So yeah, that's cool. Finally, the 2 plot cards. So the first one is a Tyrell plot card. It's called Pulling the Strings. 5 gold, 2 initiative, 1 claim, 6 reserve, plot deck limit 1, and its traits are only Scheme. When revealed, choose an Edict, Kingdom, or Scheme plot card in an opponent's use pile. Initiate the When Revealed ability on that card as if you had just revealed it. I've said before that I don't like cards that rely on my opponent's deck building, have nothing to do with my own agency in a situation. Like if my opponent doesn't have any of those types of cards, then this is useless. So I would really rather build a deck that's good in a vacuum rather than build like counterpick decks or build decks that assume that this will work. That being said, this will work. Your opponent will have at least a Kingdom plot card at some point. They're just high gold. Edicts, I don't know, I haven't paid much attention to, and Schemes are very common, especially if they're running like a Reigns of Castamere deck or if they're Lannisters. Problem is that it's just a when revealed ability. No passive abilities will work. So yeah, Kingdom plot cards are pretty common, right? Because they have high gold, Loan from the Iron Bank, trading with the Pentoshi, but do you want to use this to reveal the when revealed ability of trading with the Pentoshi and give your opponent 3 gold? I don't think so. Schemes typically do have when revealed abilities, so that's more likely. And this card has good stats. It's just fun to mess with your opponent's use pile and to do things like this, especially because I think double dealing is a scheme. So you could use this to take their double dealing plot cards when revealed ability, and then use double dealings when revealed ability to take any of their plot cards abilities. That would be hilarious, but again, it relies on your opponent running double dealing, and not everyone is. Ultimately, this is a fine card. I probably would run it for lulz, but I wouldn't run it too seriously, especially because Tyrells have a lot of summer support. The least this could do would at least be a summer card. Opportunity to mention that I think that the in-faction plot cards are a huge wasted opportunity by this game. Each faction only has 2. The faction should be defined a little bit better in my opinion because there aren't that many loyal cards. This would be a great way of defining different factions and their play styles, but they only made 2 of each of them. Some of them are absolutely worthless. Some of them are crazy. Both of the Greyjoy ones are absurd. This one seems situational. It doesn't seem bad. The Baratheons have some pretty bad ones. Some of the Night's Watch ones are pretty bad. I wish they had just done a better job with this. Last but not least, we have Famine. This is a fun card. 2 gold, 0 initiative, 2 claim, and 4 reserve. It's a winter plot card. Increase the cost for each opponent to marshal each of his or her characters by 1. Like most winter cards, or a lot of winter cards, it doesn't have very good gold or initiative, but it does have good claim. The winter trait is very good, and the effect makes it harder for your opponent to marshal characters. What this is really made for is a Kings of Winter deck. When you have Kings of Winter as your agenda, if your opponent doesn't play a summer plot card and you play a winter plot card, then the gold value of their plot card is reduced by 1. Not only is your opponent getting 1 fewer gold, but they are also now having to play their characters for 1 extra. That could be pretty bad for them. I like to run this in my Kings of Winter deck because I focus on lowering their reserve a lot, getting their hand down. Because when you do reserve, you pick which cards you get rid of. You're probably going to keep your best cards and then maybe try and do like a high gold plot card that can play them. And this can really surprise them as they're probably expecting the 1 fewer gold because it's on your agenda and they know that you might play a winter plot card. But this just doubles down on that, and it's each of their characters. So if they were planning on playing multiple, then it's not just the equivalent of -2 gold, it's the equivalent of -3 or -4. And then just the fact that it has 2 claim is great. Its own ability means that your opponent's not really going to be able to stack their board as much as they normally would. So if you can get past the fact that it only has 2 gold, then you can use the 2 claim to sort of wipe them out. If you're playing a dedicated winter deck, winter reserves, if you play it first, will increase the gold and reserve value of all subsequent winter cards by 1. So this actually is kind of problematic in a winter deck because you're going to have -1 reserve anyway, and this only has 4 reserve. So you would have 3 reserve. If you play winter reserves first, you'll go back to 4 reserve. If you're not playing Kings of Winter, it'll go to 5 reserve. Still not very high, especially considering the low gold it gives you. You can't get a lot of things out of your hand. But I consider this to be more of like an end game card. You've kind of successfully succeeded in your strategy where you've whittled down their hand. You've been choking them out of a little bit of gold. You've established your board, and then last turn you play this. You don't need the gold, but it stops them from playing any last-minute defensive things, or at least as many, and then you just 2 claim them. So that's great. Winter is a trait that has a lot of support. I think this card is good. I think it's really fun. That's a pack opening. We're done. I don't really feel the need for like some big outro or anything. Comment below if you disagree or agree with any of my opinions. Comment below if you can think of any combos that I didn't think of. Comment below if some of the combos that I did think of don't actually work. Comment below if you can answer any of my ruling questions because seriously, like I am just an amateur. I would really like to know the answers to these ruling questions. Most of them are just based on what I've seen in other card games. So if someone could clarify some of these things for me, like that Eyrie question, I've been wondering that for so long. So let me know, and I will see you guys next time for In Daznak's Pit.